Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the three-part series, Emotional Intelligence, tonight being part one. The subject for tonight is the nature and origin of our emotions. Now, I remember some years ago, I was in New York. I lived there for a while, as many people do. I had a great experience, as many people do. And I remember reading the New York Times, looking at the bestseller lists, and I saw a book that was on the list for about 350 weeks. And then you ask yourself the question, you do a bit of math, and you work out that each year has 52 weeks, so 350 weeks is a long time. And there are some books that sort of reach that level, so certainly very popular. Another book that I'm sure some of you have heard of was the book by the late Stephen Covey called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Also an international bestseller. And it made a very strong impression on me. I'm talking about this emotional intelligence. And the argument was a very simple argument. And that was that the IQ, this standardized test that assesses intelligence of individuals, being the primary factor, the primary component in assessing the quality, the value, the contribution of an individual, and this is in corporate America, was not necessarily the case. And that in fact, in measuring success in corporate America, in measuring the quality of individuals who had risen up the ranks to the very top, there was always a second component, a second area, which was crucial in evaluating the quality of the individuals who had a great chance in succeeding and who actually succeeded. And he coined a phrase, this Daniel Goleman. He coined the phrase emotional intelligence, which generally means that it's not just about being an intellectual, it's not just about being a great mathematician, a great scientist, it's not just about containing a lot of knowledge, information, but more importantly, in terms of an individual, it is about being intelligent on an emotional level. Now, the basis of the discussion tonight is primarily based on two sources, and that is, number one, the great sage, the great scholar, one of the greatest. If there was a list of the top Jewish scholars of all time, certainly in the last 1,000 years, Maimonides is certainly up there in the top 10, maybe the top 5, and maybe number 1. In terms of his clarity, in terms of his brilliant insight, and as a great teacher, communicating very esoteric or complex ideas in a very, very simple way. So number 1, it's Maimonides. You know, what does a mother want? A Yiddish mama, a Jewish mom, right? What does a Jewish mom want more than anything else? What is the number 1 word that sums up what they want of their children, of their grandchildren, more than anything else? And there's a Yiddish word, and there are many Yiddish words that don't have an exact English translation, and that is to be a mensch. Okay? And that is what we're talking about over here. Tonight, we're going to be talking about a mensch. And a mensch is primarily someone who is good on the emotional level, who is emotionally intelligent, as we'll see later on, but a good, refined individual. I'm not sure what the female equivalent to mensch is, but maybe the Jewish mom or the grandmother wants you to marry a mensch, but you understand what I'm saying. Cross-gender. So this is about being a mensch. As a matter of fact, the Talmud asks a question. And the question is a very simple question, a very powerful question, and that is, why did God give the Torah to the Jewish people? And the answer, again, very succinct, is so that man can refine oneself, can refine one's emotions. That is what, in a nutshell, the purpose of Torah is. The purpose of Judaism is. To be better people. And when we talk about better people, we're talking about refined, we're talking about good qualities. And when we talk about good qualities of an individual, we're talking primarily about one's emotions. As a matter of fact, again, Maimonides in the Laws of Tshuva, he talks about once in a year, before Rosh Hashanah, before Yom Kippur, before the High Holy Days, it's important to make an assessment. Life, if you want to know how to get somewhere, there are two components. Very simple, but sometimes overlooked. Number one, you have to know where you are. If you don't know where you are in life, you're not going to know how to get to the place you want to go. That's assuming you know where you want to go. So let's assume you know where you want to go in life. You know what you want to be, you know what you want to achieve. It's like the GPS, right? You need both. If you know where you want to go, but don't know where you are, you're not going to get there. And therefore, and that's another point we'll talk about tonight, it is crucial to do an evaluation. I think in accounting terms, in banking terms, it's called mark to market. You've got to know the exact situation, the right evaluation of something. We do that once a year, generally speaking. As a matter of fact, there were great mystics who spoke about doing, they talk about, some of the bank mark to market every day. To know where you are, to know who you are. Because if you know the starting position of every single day, when we want to try and achieve things, we want to move, we want to grow, we want to succeed, you can't begin to get anywhere unless you understand where you are. And that is critical, primarily with regard to the emotions. Because if you want to talk about performance, thought, speech, action, on a behavioral level, we're more in touch. We can kid ourselves less. But when it comes to who we really are, our character, what sort of character do we have? That is crucial. That is fundamental. That is a basis on achieving anything in life. Certainly when it comes to being a mensch, certainly when it comes to being a fine person. And therefore, as we'll see later on, this is about tonight and over the next 2 weeks, this more than anything else is about self-awareness. To know not just the way you behave, but to know who you really are. To take a deep, analytical look into yourself. And to the degree that it's not a very difficult thing to do. The problem is that most people, this whole area, what goes on inside of you, is off limits. We don't even look that way. We're looking out. We're not looking in. Very difficult thing to look in, but every single person can look in. And to the degree that you do, and you start understanding how you work, what's going on inside of you, you can achieve great things on many, many fronts. So Maimonides says that when we talk about this self-assessment once a year, we know Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, we have to make that assessment, and we have to correct the things that are wrong, etc. This is not just, he says, about behavior, which generally are how you speak, what you do, your relationships with other people, etc., but primarily about your character traits. So again, fundamental in terms of achieving anything in life is starting from the very beginning, knowing who you are. And who you are is not necessarily what you do and don't do, what you say and don't say, but what's going on inside of you. A second primary source for a lot of what we'll discuss here tonight is Hasidic philosophy, in particular the Chabad Hasidic philosophy. And just very simply, to give you the idea, Hasidic philosophy is about the most important principle of faith, which is the beginning, and in a way it contains everything as far as Judaism is concerned, and that is knowing God. Why is it so important to know God? Because God has created man in his image. And therefore, in order to know God, the way to know God is by first understanding who you are. In fact, the way to understand anything outside of you is by first looking inside of yourself. To the degree that you understand yourself, you will understand people, you'll understand everything outside of you. To the degree that you don't know who you are, you won't understand people, you certainly won't have a healthy relationship with other people. And therefore, majority of Chabad Hasidic philosophy is about psychology, is about the human psyche, because to the degree that we understand ourselves, can we begin to get closer to God. So the starting point, and in a way the end point, because all of the world around us is mirrored inside of ourselves and vice versa. The macro and the micro are very, very deeply connected. And to the degree that we understand ourselves, we'll understand the bigger picture and we'll be able to influence the bigger picture. So, again, that is the basis of the discussion tonight. And we'll focus on this particular part, the first part of this series, on the idea really, as we mentioned before, self-awareness. Most of us take for granted all that's going on inside of us, and we're operational. Okay? So you get out of bed, you have pressures, you have things to do. We focus very much on what we do. We focus very much on what we say. And that is very important, because we do have control, pretty much, over what we say and over what we do. It might be very difficult sometimes to get out of bed, right? But you have control. And sometimes you can play games with yourself in terms of motivation. But we do have control over what we say and what we do. When it comes to what's going on deeper inside of ourselves, that we just don't look there. And that is, I think, the fundamental challenge in overcoming this is to start taking a closer look at what goes on inside of you. Now the reason why, the obvious reason why people don't do that is because you don't know where to begin. This is not scientific, you don't know, your feelings, how you feel, why you feel, how to change, managing your emotions, etc. You feel a certain way. If you feel a certain way, that's who I am. If that's who I am, can I really change? Can anyone change? To give you an idea, there was a great Hasidic master who once said that it is easier, and this is a phenomenal statement, it is easier to study the whole Talmud. Now let me tell you something, the whole Talmud, that's a big achievement. It is easier to study the whole Talmud than to change one bad character trait. Okay? Now, having said that, we're not talking here about complete transformation. But again, we're talking here about understanding the anatomy, what goes on inside of us, to understand the interaction between those various components, and then we can begin to be more introspective and to analyze how the way we behave, and as we'll go on in the series, to talk about how we can actually change our emotions. Changing the way we think, changing the way we behave, changing our perception of things can influence in a very powerful way the way we feel. So, before I begin this actual presentation, and again I'll present this PowerPoint, take about half an hour, and then we'll open up to a discussion, so there'll be more interaction. I think, what I'd like to say in terms of a metaphor in getting things real is that, in a way, there are many components. Let's identify them, let's call them names. that exists inside of ourselves. All these various components, be it, and we'll get some in a second, the intellect, the emotions, thought, speech, action, will, desire, and we'll go through them, they all exist inside of us. And really, our job as human beings, in terms of bringing the best out of us, is really, number one, to identify the components. And let's pretend they're people, okay? So there's 5 people around the table. They're all looking in different directions. They all speak different languages. They don't get along all the time. And that causes a lot of distress. And all of that distress is going on inside of you. So really, in a way, what we as human beings have to do is 2 things. Number one, stand outside of that. Look inside of yourself. Understand the various players. Again, like I said, each different dynamics interacting with each other. And our objective as human beings is to be a mediator. That's really our job. There's lots of very, very powerful components here. Together, coming together, they can be a very powerful, effective team, creating a lot of very powerful synergies. And when you create the harmony between those various components that exist inside of yourself, that is a miracle. That is bliss. That is, there are moments in your life where things are so seamless. There's no stress, there's no pressure. Everything's just working together like a good team. So again, first we have to understand those various players, those various components, who they are, their dynamics, the way they work, what rubs in the right way, what rubs in the wrong way, and start getting them to talk to each other and understanding the strengths and the weaknesses of each component. And again, we, standing outside of ourselves in a way, this is the self-awareness, have to try and create a very, very harmonious dynamic. Now, I know all these things are, when it comes to the emotions, they're a lot easier said than done, but let's just take an attempt to, and obviously these are very big subjects, but I think this is a taster for all of you here tonight to give some structure to what's going on inside of you, put the emotions, which we're focusing on tonight, into context, and then once we have a beginner's understanding of that, then we can move on to the next level, the next stage in the series of actually practical ways of managing particular emotions, difficult ones, and how to apply them, how to alter them, etc. So, what we're going to cover here tonight, summary here is first the anatomy of the human psyche, as we explained before, so we'll cover the whole range from A to Z. We'll then zoom in on the intellect, which is primary in a way. As human beings, that is a primary faculty. And also, as we'll see later on, if we ever want to change our emotions are based to a certain extent, to a great extent, on our perception. So I'll just run ahead a little. We love those things that we perceive to be good for us. We hate or avert, we're repelled by those things that we perceive to be bad for us. So one of the ways, the obvious ways of changing an emotion is maybe your perception is wrong. And to the degree that you change your perception of what is good for you, you might begin to love things that you never loved before. So intellect is very important, understanding how the intellect works, and most importantly, when we understand the intellectual traits, you'll see that certain of those intellectual traits stand in the world of intellect. But there are parts, components, which are sort of the bridge between the intellect and the emotions. And that's a very, very crucial part of the discussion here tonight. We'll move on to the nature of the emotions, and then the primary emotional traits. So I think this is pretty organized, structured well. And then we'll talk about the relationship between the mind and heart, which is fundamental, as well as the relationship between the emotions and the behavior. Because as we'll see later on, the emotions stand right in the middle. They're sandwiched between the perception, the intellect on the top end, and the behavior on the bottom end. Both sides, if played right, can have a very powerful, profound, altering effect on our emotions. So our emotions are not just, this is who we are, there's nothing I can do about it. This is who I am, there's nothing I can do about it. You can change. Like everything else in life, you can change the way you behave. You can change the way you feel. And focus, bring out the best, productive emotions, and try and stay away from those negative feelings. Okay, we begin again, the overall, the macro picture. This is what goes on inside of us. You know, people are very, very complex. If you want to talk about a relationship with someone, and you know, relationships is what human beings are all about. I know they say Facebook has 1 billion users, and the average person has how many friends? Anyone?
1,000?
The average person has about 150 friends. So we're talking about a very friendly generation. This is the Facebook generation, 150 friends, right? It's all connections. So many people are connected. More people today are connected than any other time in history. So you think this is Messianic era, right? All this love, all this quality, positive relationships. But we all know the truth is otherwise. And in terms of relationships, what is complex about the relationship? Because, you know, we take ourselves for being straightforward, even though most of us are not as straightforward as we'd like to feel. And you know what we find out? When you start having a relationship with someone, then you find out how complicated you are. And we're all complicated. That's the truth. We're all very, very complex. And therefore, to the degree that you don't begin to understand who you are, and the reason why you don't begin to understand who you are is because most of us, almost all of us, are not honest with ourselves. We tend to feel, yeah, me, I'm a nice guy, right? I'm a good guy. Wait until you start having a relationship with someone, all of a sudden, I never knew it, you're talking about a different person. Sounds like a completely different guy. And that's the way human beings are. Human beings, and that's all human beings, there's nothing to be embarrassed about. You know, I was reading, someone sent me a couple of years ago, the transcripts of Al Capone. Heard Al Capone? Right? Al Capone is the stereotype of the ultimate gangster. You read his transcripts, it's amazing. It goes something like this. He says, I am a fine, decent guy offering services, providing services to people who need them. Yes, it gets a bit rough in a way, stepping on my turf, but people genuinely feel they're a lot better than they are. And therefore, when you go into a relationship, we start being exposed, not to another person. And that's not where the difficulty lies. The difficulty lies, we're starting to be exposed to ourselves.